For this conversation, I'm so pleased to welcome to Concordia Rita Roy, President and Chief Executive Officer of MasterCard Foundation, and Temi Popo, founder of Girls Trip. Temi, over to you.
Thank you so much. And everyone, welcome to this session. So I'm joined by Rita Roy, the President and CEO of MasterCard Foundation, who is a thoughtful leader and an advocate for the world's most vulnerable. Ms. Roy has worked tirelessly to build a foundation that is collaborative and known for its lasting impact. Today, the MasterCard Foundation is one of the largest private foundations in the world. And under your leadership, the foundation has focused its work on Africa and invested over $2.6 billion to advance education and financial inclusion, which has impacted tens of millions of African families. So welcome, Ms. Roy, and thank you so much for your work.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be here with you.
So my name is Temi Popo. I'm the founder of Girls Trip Tours and Ayuba Magazine. And Girls Trip is a travel experience focused on female empowerment. So I bring women from all over the world and all around Africa and the diaspora to visit an African destination. And while we're there, we explore the culture, we meet with local business leaders, and we focus on supporting women-owned businesses and also mentoring young girls throughout our stay. So it's a truly transformative experience for the travelers that mixes intergenerational and across-cultural experience. So I believe our goals are similar in terms of probably why we do the work that we do.
Absolutely. And we have a huge focus on girls and women as well.
Beautiful. So I would love to start the conversation by kind of better understanding what led you to work at MasterCard Foundation. So in my experience, I've been drawn to work at companies because of their mission and how it aligns with mine. So what led you to MasterCard Foundation? What is your approach to philanthropy? And how have you been able to kind of change or shift MasterCard's approach under your leadership?
Well, I was very fortunate. I spent most of my career in the corporate sector. And when I was headhunted to join the MasterCard Foundation, it was essentially a startup. And I was the fourth employee to get there over 10 years ago. And it's been really a phenomenal growth experience, both at the organization, but certainly from a leadership perspective. And I would say that, starting up something from the ground floor meant that we just really had to listen, learn from others, recognize that we don't have the answers to many, many, many problems. And in fact, so much about creating solutions is about working with people who are living with whatever challenge it might be, whatever gap that might be. And in many cases, the solutions are innate. They see them. But philanthropists who want to do a good job really need to pay attention. And that means approaching all of these challenges with a level of humility. And I like to think that's how the MasterCard Foundation over the years has evolved. And our approach, while we think of philanthropy as assisting communities, accompanying them, being catalytic, being able to use our convening power, I think all journeys begin with listening and learning.
Thank you for saying that. And it leads so beautifully into my next question, because you just said, the solutions are really innate to the people that are experiencing the challenges. And I love the work that MasterCard Foundation does. And I've admired it as I've shaped my work. But, growing up, the face of African philanthropy was overwhelmingly white and kind of foreign to the continent. And in many ways, that image and narrative still persists. In fact, it's why I came up with Girls Trip Tours, to center Africans in the conversation of volunteer tourism. So when I partner with local organizations, I'm mostly working with local Africans who do have already in mind the solutions to their problems. And I've also had to exhibit that same humility as someone from the diaspora in making sure to center the local actors doing the good work. So how does MasterCard Foundation prioritize local voices during philanthropic projects?
So there's several ways, and I'm so glad you mentioned that the face of philanthropy, actually the face of philanthropy, the face of innovation, the face of entrepreneurship is changing. And that's such an exciting time. And certainly for us as a foundation, when we look at the diversity, the richness, the history, the culture across Africa, we just feel so fortunate to have a small part in that narrative as well. And so I think the way for any kind of endeavor is to be intentional. So in our strategies, certainly this most recent incarnation called Young Africa Works, where we are working with many, many different African organizations to help create opportunities for 30 million young people so that they access dignified and fulfilling work. You have to be intentional. You have to set targets. And so we set a target to make sure that most of our work and most of our partners are with African organizations, large and small. And you mentioned something about the voice. The voice, in our case, it's about the voice of young people. And so well before we even got to this place, early on, we thought listening was so important that we needed to make sure that we always invited young people, particularly when we were working on education programs, entrepreneurship programs, livelihood programs, to ask young people what they thought and what they see as possible. What they see as, first of all, desired outcomes. It's not for us to measure success on our terms, but it's to really listen and understand how they perceive change. And so we began years ago. We still have a youth think tank. It's a think tank of young people from across multiple programs who help us do some research, pose important questions. We include young people in the development of strategies, critiquing strategies, and asking them, how would you assess what constitutes success? So I think there are a myriad of ways to engage any stakeholder. And the same goes with involving young women in a lot of our programming.
I love that you said you asked them for criticism, because I think criticism is a great catalyst for success. So I think it's great that you approach it that way, and it's not just about giving, but also building that relationship to give and to take.
Absolutely. And it's not just inviting critique. I think, feedback is always important for success. Failure is also important for success. Learning, the ability to learn, to understand, to pivot, to change. And I think especially now, the fact that we're living in a pandemic, it's a real challenge, I think, for many organizations, for many leaders. And so the ability to be agile and nimble and responsive requires us to listen even more and to be more empathetic. And that to me is a source of strength.
So you were just talking about, specifically African youth. And as most people might know, Africa is the youngest continent in the world. There are countries where populations have 50 to 70% that are under the age of 30. So what opportunities and challenges do you see as a result of this very unique fact? And you talked about Young Africa Works already as a response to that. But as we see a call for generational transfer of power over the past few months, especially under the pandemic, and young people are realizing that climate change is integral to economic empowerment, how is your strategy shifting for young people?
Well, the world was so different 2 years ago when we conceived of these strategies and the economic assumptions about which sectors of the economy were growing, where there's need for a great young workforce, which is skilled, have also shifted. So in part, in some cases, we are revisiting and reimagining Young Africa Works. But there's some things which are still tried and true. We still need to keep young people engaged, involve them, talk to them, and that is part and parcel of how we are working and developing our strategies. I think, Tammy, part of this is also changing the narrative and changing the conversation. There's so few people recognize, what you said. This is such a youthful continent. It is the world's youngest continent. It is getting younger every single day. And the fact, in economic terms, is Africa represents the world's labor force. Workforce, but that workforce is also shifting. The workforce is going to be more about entrepreneurs. It's going to be digital, more digital nomads. They are redefining the very nature of work and how work is transacted. But what is key is helping young people also identify what are they good at, what are their strengths, what are their passions, And there are different channels to do that. One, through the formal education system. But as we know, and you know, so many millions, the vast majority are outside of that system. And so creating opportunities for non-formal learning, which frankly is lifelong, could be modular, and could enable people to create their own building blocks and stepping stones. And so there are a variety of strategies which we work with many organizations, actually led by young people, young entrepreneurs like yourself, who have interesting ideas which we want to get behind and to help them scale. So that again, it comes back to, I guess I'm going to sound like a broken record, listening, observing, identifying young people with great ideas, entrepreneurs with great ideas, and helping them test them out, build them.
And you know, in talking about the work that you're doing on the ground and how you respond, you right, to the change in environments, can you highlight a case study that you're proud of that really exhibits the work of MasterCard Foundation, or perhaps an experience you've had on the continent that really helped put things in perspective for you and clarified what you were supposed to be doing, how to do it, or even why it was needed? Because sometimes, you know, we're in boardrooms and we come up with agendas and action items, but then to really see on the ground in context why that work needs to be done or how it needs to be done can be a very different experience.
Oh, there's so many. There are hundreds of case studies, actually. And most of my time prior to the pandemic had been on the ground, you know, visiting different communities, being in different villages, meeting with entrepreneurs. So there's an entrepreneur in the northern part of Ghana, in Tamale, a woman who works with shea butter and shea butter producers. As you know, shea butter is a highly sought after ingredient in so many cosmetics. This particular woman was the recipient of, at that time, tiny grant through another organization called CAMFED. And we thought, you know, let's just see what happens with seed capital and startups. But it was purely a grant. I don't think it was more than, you know, $100. Today, she works with a group of women, 400 women, who produce shea butter. She's been able to not only access more capital, win awards, but also create livelihood opportunity, prevent women from being exploited, because she's created centers where they can bring their shea butter nuts, you know, to production centers. They are paid a fair wage, and she understands the market value of her product, and is able then to negotiate with wholesalers. And so when you see that remarkable shift, first of all, just being out, spending the day in the village and understanding just how labor intensive this work is and how simple technology can cut out hours, you know, and the fact that they can come to a place where they can sell their butter, money, the costs, etc., are all transparent, brings down anxiety and hardship. And when you talk about, and when I ask them, how's your life changing? Hours which are saved, number one. Children who are going to school, number two. Ability to save and think of a different income stream. That's change. And those are the kinds of impacts we like to measure. And that's what always gets me coming back to say, what are we missing? What else? What are we not seeing? And what kinds of ripple effects does one entrepreneur have on a community?
That's very true. The ripple effect is huge. And I've noticed that personally, especially when it comes to women, because they're so driven to take care of their community. So if you can solve the basic needs of one woman, that frees her up to really start looking around and seeing what other problems exist and how she can help other people. So beautiful story.
Yeah, no, we're very, very grateful to be able to do this kind of work.
So my last question is, you know, about the pandemic. So we're still in the midst of it, and we don't know how much longer we'll be, you know, in this mode. So how has your work changed over the past few months? And how do you think you can continue to support Africans as they face the challenges to the pandemic? So luckily, there haven't been as many cases on the continent as in the rest of the world. but the healthcare system in many countries is pretty much non-existent. So what do you think are some of the challenges that will come out of this pandemic for Africa specifically?
So I think there are a number of ways where our work has changed. One, like many people, we're all working remotely, and we had to, basically overnight, like everyone else, plunge into this experiment of remote working, and yet at the same time use technology to create a community, keep people together, and keep people informed. And the same was true with how we related with many of our partner organizations. However, I just want to say while we are very, very blessed in Africa that the full impact of the pandemic has not been as great as it has been in Europe or in North America. This is still a very fragile environment. But one of the little known success stories is how leadership on the continent came together quickly when the first case was identified in February under the African Union, but specifically under the Africa CDC. And so in terms of having an impact, we also stepped out of our normal ways of working to act quickly, to partner with them, to enable the purchase of rapid tests. And this is also where we saw African ingenuity in the private sector come into play. Entrepreneurs created what is known as the African Medical Supply Platform. Essentially, it's the Amazon for purchasing medical supplies, where countries can aggregate their orders, have a bulk order, which brings down prices for tests, for oxygen, concentrators, for other kinds of needed supplies, and hopefully in future, not too long from now, for vaccines and for therapeutics. That's leadership. When I think about the innovation that's come about, despite the hardship that's come about because of the pandemic, it's shifting us to think about how do we get to greater numbers of people. And that has created new opportunities around e-learning, around e-distribution. I see many of the young entrepreneurs we work with, for example, in Innovation Village, it's a hub in Uganda, Kumasi Hive in Ghana, multiple accelerators, really using digital as a fundamental piece of their business model. In many ways, it's accelerated, or it is accelerating digitization across the continent. So I'm excited about that, because that will enable us to close last miles and also be so mindful that we need to make sure that it closes divides and not creates new divides, particularly for young women who do not always have access to technology.
I think it's great that you mentioned that. It is a little known fact, because I wasn't even aware of that. And I do think it's very important to give credit where it's due to African leadership, because so often the headlines are always negative, and there are positives to be shown.
There are positives, I think, and people have become very quickly unified because they recognize when they're together, their strength on a number of levels. So I'm excited about that.
So you just mentioned digitization and how you think that can help really close the gaps across Africa and help us leapfrog or expedite innovation. Over the time that you've worked in Africa, how have you seen that shift grow, that digitization and the focus on using technology to really solve problems?
Well, I'll give you a very concrete example. About 10 years ago, the whole advent of using mobile phones essentially as an ATM, or as a bank, as a mini bank, was still rather novel. Today, and certainly by the end of next year, there will be well over 600 million handsets everywhere, and the prices of those handsets are coming down. At the same time, we're seeing a stream from many financial institutions no longer going through bricks and mortar, but actually setting up agents and agent networks so that people can send money, receive money, send money. We're seeing innovations around mini loans, which can enable people to have access to capital to, if you're a trader in the market, to buy your product and at the same time repay your loan. So it's bringing down transaction costs and saving time. So I see that phenomenon repeating itself in agriculture, in healthcare, in education, and so on. So it's an exciting time, and a lot of it driven by young people.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation with you. And I hope that at some point in the future, we get to collaborate in some way.
I'd love to do that. And thank you for everything that you're doing, Tammy. And thank you for transforming the lives of girls and women.
I really appreciate that. Have a great day, everyone.
You too. Thank you. Bye-bye now. Thank you.
Bye.